In this episode, I had a great conversation with Dr. Ryan DeBell about a few different topics. We started with his online journey and how he blended health, fitness, and technology, which are his two passions, into Movement Fix, which is the company that Ryan started. We then take a turn into meditation, which was actually a good reminder for me to start incorporating meditation into my daily routine again. Then we get into the meat and potatoes of the podcast, which was all things squatting. We talk about how Ryan defines it and then common hip variations. These are things that you need to take into consideration when squatting, being your hip position, whether that's externally rotated, internally rotated, how wide to go. So this was a good conversation that we had. Hope you guys enjoy this one.
The Prehab audio experience will teach you how to take control of your health through knowledge by optimizing performance, promoting longevity, and keeping your movement system in tune. Welcome to your host, the Prehab guys.
Today we have Ryan DeBell, founder of the Movement Fix. What's going on, Ryan?
I'm just, hanging out, living life.
Working. Drinking your tea?
No, it's mate, but yeah, I just call it a tea.
Tea. How you doing, man?
I'm great. I feel great. I think things are going well. Working on projects I care about.
Yeah.
That's kind of the ideal thing, right?
Yeah, living in Buenos Aires right now, correct?
Yep.
Where you're
Been
stationed?
here. I got here 5 months ago, and I'll be here for another 3 months, and then I'll be returning to the United States after that for a year or so, I think.
Nice. We'll have to meet up during that year.
Yeah. I plan on coming down to LA. So
Awesome. Love it. Can you take people through, for the people that don't already know about you, can you take people through some type of journey that you've gone through with your digital space and how you've created this digital footprint of your own personal brand / the Movement Fix, and where that even got started in the first place to where you are now?
Yeah, I think, lots of things happen sort of accidentally.
Mm-hmm. You were one of the first to market on the online space. I followed you since even before 2015. Yeah, before PT school, actually.
Oh, wow. It's crazy. Did I influence your thinking?
You did, definitely.
No, so when I was 11 years old, I made my first website in computer class. And I designed it, and I built it, and I moderated my own comments, and I made blog posts and stuff. And I took a lot of computer classes, and I built, I would order my own parts on Newegg or whatever these sites are. Or whatever they used to be, and then I would build my own computers and stuff. So I was always really interested in computer technology and the internet and stuff. And in college, I went to business school, and for my undergraduate, and that's where I studied the management of information systems and information technology. So essentially, like programming, databases, supply chain management, all these types of business courses. And everybody always hears business school, and they think that there's this magical information that's taught, and I'll tell you that it's not.
That's not the truth.
Anybody can learn anything. So I just think that happens a lot in the chiro PT profession, since that's where I'm engulfed in, is that people think that they can't do business stuff because they didn't go to a business school. I don't have training. I don't know. Look, nobody knows. Every person in the world didn't know something until they learned it, and then they know it. So you saying that you don't know business skills is just you saying that you're too lazy to go figure it out.
100% agree.
The truth.
Yeah.
So anyways, then I went to chiro school. I graduated. I opened up my own clinic, and to market my clinic, I did talks at CrossFit gyms because I was very into CrossFit at the time. And
where was this out of?
That was out of north of Seattle, in a town called Linwood. And I had my clinic website, and I was sort of running everything through that. And I realized, okay, I did these free workshops to build my clinic base, but there was a pretty obvious demand for a longer class for trainers to teach them things that are important to helping them keep people healthy.
Yeah.
So when I did my free talk, a couple of the gym owners were like, dude, you should do a longer talk and charge people money. And I thought to myself, I'm like, wait, what?
Business?
I was like, you think I could have charged people money for this? He was like, oh, dude, I bet you could have charged $100. And I looked around the room and there were 30 people there, and I went, wait, that's like $3,000. You know, and I didn't have my clinic wasn't even open at that time. So like the idea of making $3,000 from doing a talk about things I loved was like incredible. And then somebody else told me the same thing. And then we said, okay, let's do one. So I did this first one and it went really well. So I think we sold 20 spots and it was $200.
What was the topic?
Gosh, dude, it was such a trainer. Now, like, it was so messy. Yeah. It was so messy. The topic was, I don't even know because it was so unorganized.
Yeah.
And I think there's an important point in that. It's like, if you don't feel like you're ready or organized to do something, business and doing things like that is not a test. Like a test you take once and you get the score. Business is like, you get the chance to do it every day. So every day you can just do it better. So even if you suck now, the only way to get better is to do it, realize you suck, reflect on yourself, and then try to make it better.
Yeah.
So I started doing those, and I realized in order to make that bigger, I needed to have some way of discovery. So I started doing YouTube videos and blog posts on my site. And then I realized because it was all together as my clinic, I wanted to split it. So my clinic was one brand, and then I started at that time, which was the Movement Fix. Now it's just Movement Fix. I think it's cooler that way because there's not one, you know. And yeah, that just started growing. I blogged. I wrote an article about squatting and hip joint anatomy and the variations. And that got a ton of traffic, like within the first 48 hours of me posting it. And I had a bunch of invites to do talks at gyms like the next day.
Really, so about the hip. So that's what.
Well, just about. Well, I had my workshop on my website, but then I posted that post, and it got like 1 million hits or something like that in 48 hours. Man. Crazy. If you know anything about web traffic, that's a lot for a small.
That's
site.
Insane. Yeah.
Yeah. And I got invites of people like, hey, come teach at our gym. So I had like 20 or 30 of those, and I organized those. And then the next year I taught like every weekend in a city in the US.
Oh, wow. No, I love the idea. You start now. Yeah. I mean, you're going to only get better and better the more you do these kinds of things.
Oh yeah.
No one's ever ready. No one has the perfect plan on day one.
No, I mean, like, I think that you can look at people who are doing things and not realize that it was probably pretty hard for them to start too.
Yeah.
Like it's hard to start something, to actually do it and then continue the pursuit of it. So then anyways, like to get to sort of the digital side of things, I was doing those talks and, I noticed there's a lot of other people starting to do talks, and I always like to try to change what I'm doing when I think something's about to get really saturated. And so I started making online resources for people because I felt like after teaching, I taught, 100 workshops at that point, which is like a couple thousand people who took the class. And so I saw so many of the same problems, shoulder and hip and whatever. So I decided like, I'm going to make some online programs for people who want to take control of themselves, because I think one of the best things that we can do is help people take the control of their own health. And then if I'm being honest with myself, I think probably like 80% of people could get better with the same program, with given simple guidelines. Then there's 20% of people who definitely can't, and they should get help. But like a lot of people, it's like, oh, my shoulder kind of hurts. First of all, they're not even going to go see somebody, but they will find resources online. And I wanted to provide value for that person. So I decided to like take some of my energy from the workshops and start building my little corner of the internet of resources for people to take care of their own body. So that's what led to the digital products. And then from there, I'm just continuing to try to find new things to do and grow and make. And
then the T-Tool must have been one of your first tangible products then, right? Out of the digital space.
Yeah. So I was going through a somewhat tumultuous time in my life, I guess you could say, about 2.5 years ago. I was married for 8 years, and then that ended. So it was a very challenging point in my life. And I had an opportunity to work on this product that a friend of mine designed, this tool. And I was at his house because I was doing a talk near him, and I was staying with him. And he's like, "Hey, man, I want to show you this thing I've been working on. I have a potential business idea." And I was like, "Okay, right. Let's see what this is." And he hands me this weird prototype of this like metal tool, like an ISTM tool type thing, but it like not flat tool, like all the tools are flat, right? This was like a weird morphed doorknob on like a tongue depressor tool. And he's like, I've been designing this for 2 years, and I want to go in. I want you to build this business with me.
Yeah.
And I held it, and I was like, okay. And I played with it for like an hour, just flicking it around my hand. And I realized, like, God, I just don't want to put this thing down. It's fun to like hold. And I never felt that way about any other tool before. I always be like, ugh, I hate holding this. My hand's tired, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I realized, okay, I canceled 30 workshops that I had scheduled to teach. And I decided, all right, I'm going to do this. Part of my agreement was I was funding the project. So I funded the project. I got a tent and I slept in his backyard for 5 weeks during the last summer.
Damn.
So that we could just work.
Non-stop.
So I literally woke up, started working, it was bedtime, went outside, got in the tent.
Oh man, that's crazy.
I was like, if I'm going to do this, I want to do it. I want to really see what I'm capable of achieving if I dedicate myself completely to something.
Yeah. Well, you believed in it. I think that's what it is. You believed that this could be something big, and you committed yourself because of that. If you didn't believe it, you would have quit. There's no way that a normal person would just push through 5 weeks of nonstop work if they didn't think this was going to be a hit.
Yeah. So I thought it was going to take like a couple months to make, and it ended up taking us 15 months basically of starting to work on it until production, because of how it's shaped, we had to build it in an entirely new process. And we didn't know how to do that. We had to figure out how to do that. And then how do we get the box? How do we make sure that the box fits it correctly? How do we make sure people understand how to use it? But our big thing with that was like, I wanted to make something that people love. And I wanted to make something that I thought was different and provided a unique differentiated thing that somebody could use. So I didn't want to just like make another tool. I wanted to make something that I thought actually like, let's try to make it better for people so that we can help clinicians be better clinicians. That's our goal with T-Tool and that company that I'm trying to build over there. Is how do we help clinicians be better clinicians? So how do we help the longevity of their hands? How do we help provide them with better products? How do we help with education? Those are some of the things that we're working on. But I've always been a believer that when you see an opportunity that feels right to you, deep, all the way down inside of you, you got to do it.
Go in.
But if you have 5% where you're like, you have to listen to that. And probably in my experience, every time I make a decision that I don't like later, I look back and I realize I did have that shred of doubt inside of myself. And I ignored it because I thought I was smarter than my gut, than my instinct. So you can talk yourself into or out of anything. And when you want to transition, or if you want to make a move in your life, that type of thing, you got to find what really feels authentically true to yourself and do work that you're proud of. I think that's really important, to feel good about what you're trying to do.
Yeah, no, I think that's all of it. That's a really good life lesson right there. And the only way to realize these things is to be in tune with your mind and your body, and to reflect and be aware. If you're just in go mode 24/7, sometimes you can't look big picture. You're just in the tunnel. And I think those are some cool points you brought up. Let me write this down. I'll link the T-Tools in the show notes for those of you guys that are interested to see what it's about.
I think part of that too, if you don't mind, is realizing that you are not your mind and you are not your body. Because your mind, this is going to be a little bit meta.
Yeah.
Your mind can trick you. Right? Like, have you ever done something that you later realized was stupid?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, right? Because you thought your mind basically took over and like had this reaction to something. You didn't really see it objectively.
Mm-hmm.
So I think part of it is when you're making these decisions to step back and try to use your mind as a tool, try to use your body as a tool, and see what do you really want when you're in a state where you can think clearly.
What do you do to step back?
Deep meditation, which we can get into that if you want. I think people hear meditation and they don't really understand what it is. Not saying that I'm an expert, but I've spent a lot of time in there.
Yeah.
And
what is it in there? What do you in meditation?
Yeah. I think that you can use it for a lot of different things that you're trying to work through, but I also think that people want to increase their consciousness, right? That's why I think part of the reason why people meditate is to increase their consciousness. But do we even know what that means?
To know your own thoughts a little bit better, maybe, and to be more in tune with your thoughts.
I think increased consciousness is seeing the world objectively for what it is, which is that we are life inside of this weird body, and we are on this planet, and we can choose what to do with our time, and that directs our life. Meanwhile, if you zoomed out from that perspective, none of it matters.
I like that objective because go for it.
Yeah, we don't see things objectively.
No, because we let these emotions and these different things that are going on environmentally affect our way of thinking, and that is basically the opposite of looking at things objectively.
Exactly.
Anger, stress, love, hate.
Right. So like meditation is trying to disconnect yourself from being and identifying with your mind and identifying with your body to then objectively see everything. Yeah. And I think when you do that, you're more conscious of what this is, what this world is. It's a very strange place. Like we're talking on a piece of metal right now that lets us immediately communicate our thinking. Like 200 years ago, that would not have been possible. Like collective consciousness of humanity is certainly increasing because now we can all talk and share. This is why I'm a big proponent of everybody creating stuff for the internet. Because if you share your thoughts on the internet and I share my thoughts on the internet, those multiply because they can sort of bounce off and contradict or challenge each other. And every person who adds to that, it adds a multiplier. So we only refine faster and better. This is why I think it's hilarious when people get personally offended on the internet day. But I think squatting with different stances stupid because, and it's like, dude, that's not the point. The point is this is a topic that we need to explore collectively in order to help people not have hip impingement and not develop hip osteoarthritis that may be caused from things that we're doing. Like that is the point. People get personally offended. It's like you are just missing the whole point of this. The whole point is to help people improve their lives. And you know what? You know what doesn't result in that? Ignorance, because people won't share their thoughts on the internet because they're afraid of being criticized. It doesn't help. That helps nobody.
Yeah. Well, I think that it's only a matter of time if that's the case, that the good information continues to rise and the bad information will just sink. So that way, once people are a little more on board with these ideas that are a little more evidence-based or more people back and can vouch, that it's the people deciding what becomes popular versus what stays underground and what doesn't get exposed. And so if we can continue to support and think alike and bring up that high quality information, that's what's going to become more mainstream. And
I like the truth will always win. But in order for that to happen, it has to be, all the information has to be refined, and we need all these different opinions coming in to help us churn it and refine it so that we can get to that point. I mean, look at the conversation about the lower back, right? It was anti-flexion, and now it's like, okay, well, maybe we went too much that way. So we need people challenging things. If you take it personally, you're missing the point. The point is for us all to get better, to help people. The point is not that this guy's right and this guy's wrong. That is the problem. If you get too stuck in your identification with your mind and your body, it's like, oh, now I'm wrong because you've identified as this person who thinks this way. So therefore, if someone challenges that, it's like, oh, it's negative
coming
towards
at you. Yeah.
Right. And it's not. That's not. And that's why I think, how this kind of a lot of this stuff ties in.
Yeah. Ryan Holiday has that book. Ego is the enemy. I just read
Uh,
his other book, Stillness is the Key, actually, which kind of goes off of this whole meditation idea. Really,
yeah, I
really
mean,
good.
we're all able to learn so fast. Like we
And
can
there's
evolve ourselves by choosing.
the hardest part right now is there's so much information that people get paralysis by analysis because they're not sure what to read or what to do. And so
Yeah.
that's the other issue as well on the other side of the coin.
Well, I guess, part of that too would be like trying to understand if you're so far down your own hole, you probably would get way more benefit learning something that has nothing to do with what you know.
Mm.
How
Yeah,
much
that's good.
more do you need to know to help the people that you help? Really? I mean, do you really need to know so much more detail to help the vast majority of people clinically?
Yeah. It's
Maybe
a
you
good
need to
question
learn
to ask
about
yourself.
psychology, maybe you need to learn about like the way that people think. Maybe you need to look at like interpersonal relationships. Maybe that stuff is more important for you becoming better at helping people than knowing even more information about the knee and being like a terrible communicator.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you should study rhetoric. Maybe you should study poetry so that you can learn that the people you are helping are people with emotions that don't know how to necessarily disconnect themselves, and they get tied to their knee or their back pain, and they actually need help understanding the body is their machine. It's not them. So if you have a problem with your knee, it's okay. Well, that's your machine. Let's work on that. But that doesn't say anything about you as a person, at you as a life.
Mm-mm. Yeah.
But people get so connected, like, oh, my back, my life is terrible. It's like, no. Your back hurts. Your life isn't terrible, though.
Yeah.
Life is great. But if you're like, well, it's because this one fiber of the disc, and the person's like emotionally suffering, you are blind to it. So increased consciousness could be observing how other people are handling things too.
Yeah.
You see?
A lot of
So
that comes down to it comes back to that motivational interviewing idea as well.
yeah.
But anyways, let's get to the conversation I wanted to get to today. That was a good little rabbit hole we went down. But it's this topic of hip anatomy and
Uh-huh.
hip structure and how it can relate to squatting and what variances should people be squatting with. So let's break it down. I think I've read a few things that you've came out with. I know you talked about that article that went viral, but let's talk about the anatomy of the hip joint itself very briefly. That way people can have some kind of foundation, and then you can touch on some variances after that are, I guess, a little more common that we may see. I guess not see visually, but internally we may see.
Yeah. Well, I think the most important question to first ask, because this is why I think people disagree.
Mm-hmm.
Because first of all, people disagree like, oh, we should squat toes forward or toed out, or how much, and blah, blah, blah. And they disagree on that, not because they disagree that there's anatomical variations. We know there are anatomical variations. I mean, you just need to look and see it's there. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that shouldn't even be an argument. We know that is. Now, the argument could be how much anatomical variation is there. But the real question is this: how do you define what a squat is?
Mm-hmm.
How do you define squatting? So I define it as the position that you would put your feet in to achieve maximal hip flexion.
Mm.
Okay? And your knees and your ankles are allowed to bend. And if you're doing it as a movement, then, it probably doesn't matter as much what your form is. But if you're doing it as a heavy exercise and you're doing it to strengthen hip flexion, aren't you trying to position yourself so that you can go through the largest amount of hip flexion possible for that person? If the answer to that is yes, then you absolutely have to change the position of the feet for somebody who's retroverted, and I'll come back to the definitions in a sec, versus someone with a normal hip joint. Why? Because the bone is twisted. Therefore, in order to achieve maximal hip flexion in a three-dimensional object, you would have to position it differently.
Yeah.
So the only reason to say not to change people's stance is if you either don't believe that there's variation, or you don't believe the squat is to achieve maximal hip flexion under load. And I
And
think that's the root where so much argument comes from.
you're differentiating the definition between a squat and a deadlift because you're saying that the ankles can bend, so that way the knees can unlock and you can get the basically the hip as low as you can.
Well, if I'm thinking about the actual joint, the actual hip joint, and I would think that a squatting exercise is a maximal hip joint flexion exercise, as heavy as you can, where you're keeping the back held in neutral and you're allowing the ankles and the knees to bend. A deadlift and all the variations, I think, is very different. I think that you're essentially trying to put maximal tension through the posterior chain. I mean, again, it depends. I haven't thought through how I would define the deadlift in that way as much because I haven't had presentations on it in that way. But if you have to get down to the source of the question, the source, which is how do you know what a squat even is? Because why is a squat not with your feet together? Why is that not a squat? Well, it's because you can't go as deep, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well then, so the question is, how do you go the deepest? You go the deepest by positioning the femur in the socket of the hip on the acetabulum in a way to allow for the most depth.
But then if you want to get the most depth, everyone would get more depth if they opened up their hips and rotated their hips a little bit externally, wouldn't they? Even someone anteverted,
I don't know. It depends how anteverted somebody is.
I guess in the extreme cases.
Yeah. And the extreme cases are, let's say it's 5% or less. But those are 5% of people that we really need to pay attention to, because who's going to have the problems? The people who are quote unquote normal, or the people who have the deformations?
I see. So basically when you educate on the squats and hip anatomy, you want people to squat as deep as they can. The goal is to maximize that hip flexion.
I'm saying I think that's what squatting is, and I don't think people even realize that's how they're defining it. I mean, how else are you defining it?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I
Exactly.
haven't really thought about that too much.
Exactly. Like we just do it. This is, again, trying to be objective. We're these human beings flying around on this rock through space, and we're doing this exercise that we call a squat. Well, how do we even define what it is? I don't know. I guess I go down and my knees bend and my hips bend. Like we don't even agree what the point of a squat is. It to go down and up below 90 with the most weight? Well, that might be a different stance than if it's maximal depth. So if you're trying to be a power lifter who's trying to get maximal weight, and you're trying to just break 90 because we made the standard of what we consider a squat for that sport, then that probably will be a different stance. What I'm saying is, if you're trying to teach people how to Olympic lift or squat as deep as they can, we have to take the anatomical differences that we know exist into account as part of that equation, because at the very end ranges of motion, the structure of a joint is going to determine how that person must move. It's just geometry. Yeah. Like take away, like if you just made it into a model of like made out of plaster, we know that will go deeper if you orient it in a particular way.
Yeah.
So I think that before I can say, should somebody squat like this or like this or like this, it's like, what do they want? What are they trying to do? If I don't know the answer to that, I don't know what to do.
Right. Oh, it makes perfect sense. You have to have the end goal in mind. That's what you're working up to. If you don't have the end goal in mind,
and this is why people argue about this, because someone will be like, no, it needs to be more toed forward. And it's okay. Then their goal is not maximal hip flexion, apparently.
Yeah. I think a lot of times people confuse an assessment with an intervention as well. I know oftentimes people do assessments with a bar overhead, squatting down as far as you can, keeping the feet straight. And that may find some limitations. But if you find a huge limitation, that person doesn't feel comfortable in that position, there needs to be some change that's occurring. And whether that's opening up the hips or just rotating the hips externally to open up some space there.
Yeah. I think, so why don't we talk a little bit about what the differences in the structure are?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay. So in my opinion, I think that we've missed the fundamental base of human movement, which is the skeleton. I mean, what is the ultimate confine of our body's ability to move?
Yeah, the bones.
It's the bones, right? And no one's we're all talking about function. Okay, but look, if someone's 7 feet tall and another person's 4 feet tall, all the physics changed. Yeah. The levers, the length of the bone is the lever. And so if you agree that levers change how things, like if something has, different length levers from one machine to another machine, they're going to move differently.
100%.
I think we haven't given that enough credit. It's like we look at a deadlift, standard sized height bar, variable sized human, and we expect everybody to do it the same. It's just like, it's madness. Why would we expect that? Do I expect a 4-foot person to be able to jump and dunk a basketball on a 10-foot hoop the same way someone who's 7 feet tall can? No, fixed height. But I expect it with a barbell on the ground. It's madness.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have to look at the person in front of us and how they're built. That's going to affect all of the lifts they do. Right. This is why people with really long arms, they have a very hard time, let's say, doing a strict ring muscle up. They have way longer levers. It's way hard, it's way more force has to go through the joint. Okay, so first we have to look at the skeleton. Now you can easily see variations in lengths of bones, can't you?
Yeah.
We see that as height. We see that as shoe size. We see that as sleeve length and pant length, all that stuff. Okay, that's a static thing. Variation in the joint structure for the bones where we know this happens a lot, shoulder joint, hip joint. When I say a lot, let me put an asterisk by that. It's like maybe 10% or less. And I think people get stuck on that too, but we'll get into that in a sec. So we can't see that. You have to actually move the joint to understand the variation. So now there's an added layer of complexity because you have to interpret, is that movement because there's a variation in the joint or is it because they're tight, right? Mm-hmm. How do I know that? How do you know that? Like if somebody's, well, I don't want to get there yet. Okay. So we have variations in the femur. The femoral neck and the femoral head will be aligned differently if you compare it to the back of the knee. Mm-hmm. The posterior condyles. Okay, that's how you come up with the version angle. You would look downward on a femur, and you would measure the orientation of the femoral head and neck compared to the intercondylar, the posterior line, this line that you would draw along the condyles of the knee. So depending on that angle that's created, you would be classified as normal, which would be like 10 to 15 degrees of anteversion. You would be considered retroverted if that angle was like 5 degrees or less, which means there's a gap from 10 to 5 that apparently no one wants to call anything, by the way, if you look at the research there. And then anything above 15 would be considered anteversion, okay? So maybe you can visualize what that would look like. So if you had somebody who is 15 degrees anteverted, if you wanted their hip joint to have the exact same orientation as somebody who is 0 degrees of version, they would have to internally rotate their hip 15 degrees to make up for the twisting that they have in the femoral shaft. Mm-hmm. So if you thought that there was an optimal hip position for squatting, right, an optimal orientation of the femoral head in the socket, you could have a 15 or 20 degree difference from a person who's quite anteverted to a person who's quite retroverted. Because let's say there was this optimal alignment. The retroverted person would have to externally rotate to get into that same position as an anteverted person. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you would, that's why you have to test people's femoral rotation. And in my opinion, the best way to do it is prone. This is my opinion. Mm. So you put somebody prone. They're laying face down, you bend their knee, and you do like what would be considered a Craig's test. Mm-hmm. Okay. If you look at a textbook, right, you'd be looking at somebody you would see their shin vertical if you're looking from their feet towards their head with them laying on the table prone. And you would internally rotate their femur by taking their shin, pushing it to one side. Mm-hmm. And then you'd go the other way in external rotation. And that'll give you this slice of pie. Okay, so maybe it's like you're supposed to have 40 degrees of internal, 45 of external, whatever the number is. Mm-hmm. Whatever textbook you want to refer to. Now, the problem is this. If you take somebody, and let's say they should have this 20, 30 degree slice into internal rotation, okay? And you go into internal rotation, and they're only at like 5 degrees. And it's like, boom. Feels hard. How do you know if that's tightness or if it's retroversion?
Yeah, I mean, well, if it's hard, it sounds like it could be more retroversion. I know what I try in the clinic sometimes is
I'll intervene and work on that IR and see
Mm-hmm.
if it improves. And if it's staying the same / if it's creating pain, then prognosis is probably not good, and it's likely more structural at that point.
So check this out. Let's say that person has limited IR.
Mm-hmm.
Boom, 5 degrees. Now, if the bone was twisted, and let's say there should have been 20 degrees,
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't I find 15 additional degrees in the external rotation?
Right.
Because if the bone is rotated,
Mm-hmm.
then
the total arc should be
slice of pie, the total arc should be the same. The slice of pie is shifted. So if you're pushing into external rotation, or internal rotation, and you're like, ooh, feels really stiff, just take them in. If they have a ton of external rotation, I mean, don't you have your answer? Why would the tightness that causes limited internal rotation create magically an excessive amount of external rotation?
Yeah.
Why would that happen? It's because we're so stuck thinking muscles are tight that we can't take a step back and be like, well, isn't that what a 5 degrees of anteverted hip would do?
Mm-hmm.
No, we don't want to think it's that, because we can't change that. So we got to blame it on something that we can change. And we got to force people to think, like, why can we not at least entertain the idea of like, well, maybe this is one of those people. If there are, let's say, 10% of people who fall within this retroverted definition, those people are the ones that we need to make sure are a little bit more externally rotated when they're squatting, or they're more likely, potentially, you can't say anything because there's always a study to show the opposite of what you say, but they're more likely to have hip impingement issues because of the way the femoral neck will hit the acetabular rim.
Mm-hmm.
So the people who have the problems, wouldn't it logically make sense that they're the ones that probably need this information more than anybody?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And everybody's cranking on their IR thinking they're magically going to fix their internal rotation, and they could be missing a retroverted hip. It's not like they don't happen.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So basically, retroverted hip, abduct the hip, externally rotate the hip. However, you can create some more space within that hip while they're going into hip flexion to allow them to get into hip flexion, to get into that depth that they want to get into. And then I had a question too with retroversion. Do you feel, I don't know if this is just myth, but there's some cultures that have more of a retroverted hip than others. Have you read anything or heard anything about that? Like Asian cultures that have more of this retroversion?
Yeah. I've read some studies on that. I have one here I could reference. Let's see if I can find that particular one.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting to see if we, because I know people talk about that. I don't know if this is there's any truth to it, or.
I think there's definitely truth to it. Hold on, let me try to find this particular. Let's see. I may not be able to find it quickly here.
That's fine. For those of you guys listening, though, it's interesting though, because there are oftentimes asymmetries that we see in the clinic, and Ryan, I'm sure you do all the time, where there's one side that has more hip ER than the other side, or more hip IR than the other side. And oftentimes this is something that I've read in the literature that happens even at younger ages, and it's just a protective mechanism. Whether it's being on one leg more or kicking with one leg more, maybe you just cross your leg one side over the other, and over time it's adapted to this position. And this change is now structural. Maybe you don't have any pain then, but 10 years later, after all these heavy squats that you start doing, now after that 10-year period of squatting, now it can potentially become painful, and you're blaming one set of squat for that, when in reality this is a structural change that's happened over years and has been there for a long time.
Yeah. People hear structural change and then they think like, oh, well, you guys are just, it's just a cop out. It's just a cop out. Like, how is that a cop? Like, it's just, it can be reality. Like, why would you want to ignore reality? It's because you lose the hope that you're going to be this magical mover who can do every movement perfect, that every Olympian in the best of every particular field. It's not going to happen. Mm-hmm. Like, by necessity, like you look at the Olympics, this is the problem, right? People watch the Olympics and they watch people Olympic lift and they go, I want to be able to do that. And then they have a hard time doing it. And it's like, well, it must because I'm not stretching. I'm not doing the right foam rolling. I'm not doing the right corrective exercises. Well, maybe it's because the highest level of sport, you get the very end of one type of bell curve of things that lead to somebody being the best in the world. And you have to understand that and then realize that everyone has a little bit different build. That's okay. We can do 99% of the same stuff. But at the very, very ends, when you're pushing it, just be aware that you may not be able to achieve the same position as an Olympian who has basically risen to the top through much of a process of elimination and through their extreme dedication and hard work. So I just think that there needs to be a realistic optimism. This shouldn't be a pessimistic thing. Like, look, the reason I'm so passionate about retroversion is because I am retroverted. Definitely. I am like hard retroverted. And I was so many times when I was being coached, when I was like, you know, not doing what I do now, but like when I was just going to the gym being coached, it'd be like, Ryan, you got to turn your toes more forward. Like, no, it hurts my hip. Yeah. Why would I naturally go here? I can easily get down into this depth. And I've had so many people at my workshops who I just play around with their squat stance. We tweak it a little bit, let them toe out, break the dogma. And then they're like, I don't have any more hip pain.
Yeah.
It just immediately well, it's like, yeah, think about what's happening under this. Think about what's happening in the joint. Try to visualize the joint and what you're doing. And it's like, well, if you're pinching something and then you stop pinching something, it feels immediately better.
Yeah. Which one do you go to first, I guess? Opening up the stance, externally rotating the hip, or is there one that you like more than the other, or a little bit of both?
I think you have to play around with both, and probably some of that has to do with the length of the femurs as well. But I think you just have to play with those two, the degree of toe out and the width. And like, I don't want people to listen to this and think like, oh, nothing matters. The movement nihilism. Nothing matters. There's research to show everything works. Everything doesn't work. So blah, 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 right? Nothing matters. Don't do anything. I think that's a terrible, terrible mentality that has crept in to some corners of this chiro PT rehab world, because we have so much conflicting information. So anyway, I don't want to perpetuate movement nihilism. I think realistic optimism is great. The realistic thing is our bodies degrade over time. If you don't think that's true, why are there not 50 billion people here? It's because a lot of them died because we physically degrade. It's just a fact of life. Get over it. Okay? Like, make something to show me. I will do whatever program you give me if it makes that not happen to me.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
I want my money back when I die. But so if we're realistic, our bodies do degrade. If we're realistic, we all do have slightly different structure. If we are realistic, we're all not going to perform like the highest Olympic athlete and be able to get in the positions. But what can we do? We can focus on all the great things you can do and try to get better at the stuff that you want to get better at. But focus on all of the amazing things your body can do. Your body can do so many more things than you're doing with it. I guarantee you. People go to the gym and they think the only workout for their lower body is doing deadlifts and squats. There's so many things you can do. Maybe you don't want to call it quote unquote functional, but why not try to learn everything you could do with this thing you have? You have this incredible physical form that has these, like, you have all these muscles that are connected to your brain, and you can decide every little thing that you want to do with it. And you want to get so focused on one little thing that you saw one person do, and that's like the pinnacle of it to you. There's so much we can do. We should be exploring all of the things that we can do and then trying to maximize that rather than like arguing about one little thing that it's like, man,
I know. I mean, you could easily just vary. Like, for example, I actually do have a retroverted hip as well. When I can't even cross my right leg over my left leg because it's the complete opposite. It may be anteverted. I don't know. But my left hip has a ton of ER, no IR. And so when I go into squat, if I go back squat, I'm gonna feel a little bit of a irritation in my left hip just because I don't have the motion. Now, if I do a hex bar squat, I'm fine because I can actually keep my chest upright a little bit more. The trunk angle is not as large, so I'm not going into as much hip flexion. And obviously, front squats are no problem at all. But I mean, I can still meet the intent of an exercise. And if I really want glutes, well, I can do hip thrusts now. and still load very, very heavy. It's
Exactly.
you can still meet the intent. It's just making sure, like you said before, going back full circle here, you got to find your goal, and there's so many different ways to hit your goal. You just have to be open, and honestly, a lot of it too comes down to being educated and knowing the other options, and that's where us putting
That's
content
why we're here.
Yeah.
And that's why we're here, huh? That's why we're doing what we're doing, so that we can share that information. It's like, dude, you know what else I think though?
Mm-hmm.
I think not enough people even know what their goals are at the gym.
Yeah, that's true.
Like,
that's
what is, like, I've had to, like, my goal is to keep my body as physically healthy and strong and capable as I can for as long as possible, aesthetically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, most people won't admit to that though. Most people won't.
Why would I? Why would I not? Why would I? I want to look in a mirror and be like,
you created this.
Like, it's a reflection of your mind, right? Because like, I could choose to not go to the gym and then my body will look different. I could choose to go to the gym and I can choose certain exercises that I know will, number one, improve strength, build muscle, and then I can choose what I eat. And therefore I could be pleased with what I've, been able to create. I don't know. Why would you not want to feel good?
And look good, feel good, look good. Yeah.
Yeah, I just think it's been shamed in a way where it's like, well, our bodies are functional. Yeah, but.
Yeah, I think a lot of people won't admit to that because it's a very superficial way of thinking about it. But at the end of the day, everyone also wants a nice car and a nice house as well. Is that not superficial? I mean, the number one thing
and when you feel good too, when you feel good about how you've dressed, how you present yourself, how you speak, how, all of these things, I think that you can do better for the world if you're happy with yourself. Now, yeah, you could make the counter argument like, okay, that's just total vanity. And like, yeah, I mean, probably. So what?
Yeah. I mean, you're real with yourself and you understand that.
Yeah. I don't think we should ever judge anybody else's goals. Like, you can do whatever, whoever's listening to this, you can do whatever you want with your body. It's your choice. If you want to crush your body doing super hard workouts so that you can work out fast, do it. If you want to, what do I care what you want?
Yeah. Look at Ronnie Coleman. Have you seen him?
Yeah.
Have you seen him?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Where does this stuff go in 20, 30, 40, 50 years, right? I will help anybody achieve their goals. I don't care what their goal is though. What does it matter to me? Mm-hmm. You figure out what you want. And then if you want help from anybody, the person helping should be non-judgmental of the goal. My job is to help you achieve the goal.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's it. Get you from point A to point B.
Right. Exactly. And how many times in the clinic do we not do that either? People come in and we don't even figure out what they want.
We don't even ask. Yeah.
We don't even ask. And if we don't ask, how the hell do we know what to do? That means that we do what we think they want.
That's not right. Yeah.
No, it's not.
That's not the way it should be.
It's like, let me teach you how to deadlift. And they're like, okay, but like,
I don't
want a deadlift.
Yeah.
No, but you have to because there's research to show that deadlifting makes back pain go. Find something else that they do want to do. You don't have to force them to do something they don't want to do. You can be creative enough to figure out solutions that work with people and align with what they want, whether it's what you think exactly it needs to be, have them do something else that is similar to a deadlift, that maybe it's not with a bar, maybe it's lifting something else, maybe it's who knows what,
Yeah. I mean, that's why, my evals have become so long because the subjective aspect of it is really the most important aspect day one. That's what you need to figure out is all about that person, not just what they want to do, even not just why they're here, but understand that person. There's this idea of give me 5 about a person. So if someone says, give me 5, you give that person that's asking 5 things about that patient that doesn't even have to do with why they're in the clinic. So like who's, I don't know, who's their mom, who's their dad, what do they do for a living? 5 things that are irrelevant. That way you understand. That way you understand that person as a whole versus just this pathology, like you were saying, not just this person that has knee pain and is in the clinic because their meniscus is torn, but you understand who they are.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's so much inter and intrapersonal development required to do that too, to really listen to a person in front of you, figure out what they really want, and then use your skill set and tailor it to that. I mean, isn't that what we're trying to do here?
Yeah.
We're trying to use this broad skill set that we've developed from our education, from our experiences. listen to this person and craft something for them.
That's all it is. And a lot of it too is allowing that person to open up and trying to be this communication chameleon and allowing yourself to adapt to the way they want to communicate so that they feel comfortable with opening up for you. And that's a lot of times the limitation too, because you're this figure, the clinician, talking down to the patient, and that's not how it should be.
No, it's been really interesting here. I went to a doctor's appointment here in Argentina, and like when you go in, like, so they do this custom thing where they kind of like, they like kind of kiss each other on the cheek whenever you meet somebody. You do that with the doctor.
Interesting.
Like you basically meet them and you go in and you like give them a hug.
They're already your friend. Yeah.
Can you imagine doing that?
That's so foreign here. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's like this level of just like, hey, I'm a person too, and I'm here to help you. It's just, I'm not like, this different type of, thing. Like, no, I'm a person too, and this is just what I do.
No, I love it. Well, Ryan, I know we got to wrap this up. There's two questions that I want to ask you that we ask all our guests. The first one is, what does Prehab mean to you? Our platform is trying to educate people on taking more of a proactive approach to their physical health. So in I guess however you want to describe it, whether it's physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, what does Prehab mean to you?
I think it means doing the things that need to be done before they need to be done.
Okay. That's a quick and concise way of explaining it. I like that. The second one is, what is one piece of advice you would recommend for our audience? I know you've talked about a few different things of staying open-minded, reading things that don't even have to do with your specific thought process, just to think outside the box. But anything else you think that's low-hanging fruit for people?
This isn't what I thought initially. It's not low-hanging fruit.
Okay. High-hanging fruit. Let's either way.
I don't know what it is. So I think you should at some point take a month off of working and just live.
How often?
I don't know. I think if you could do that once a year, that'd be incredible. But I think you should at least do it once.
Yeah.
I think you should experience what it's like to live life where you don't work for a month.
That's awesome.
Have you ever done that?
I've not even taken a week now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's super important. I think you realize and you can see a lot of things that, if your head is always in work, you don't even realize it's in front of you.
No, exactly. I like that idea. All right, Ryan. Well, I think we're going to have a part 2. I didn't even get to all the questions I wanted to ask you, but thanks for your time. And where can people follow you if they want to look into your programs, your courses? What's an easy way for people? Your website, your social media?
Yeah. So home base is our website, themovementfix.com. Also, another great resource is our YouTube channel. You can just YouTube The Movement Fix. You could follow on Instagram at Movement Fix. I also have a podcast, Movement Fix Podcast. And then if you want to learn more about T-Tool, you can visit thettool.com as well. And then I post personally on my page at Ryan DeBell on Instagram, but I don't really do that much on it. So
yeah, your YouTube has a ton of stuff though.
Yeah, I've put most of my time and energy into YouTube and Movement Fix Podcast. So that's where all the deepest stuff,
the good stuff's at. Cool. All right, Ryan. Thanks again for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Hope you enjoyed this podcast and this conversation that Ryan and I had. Just to let you guys know, we do have a hip prehab program, which is now available on our website and our app store. This is a program that's 14 weeks long that takes you through a progression of exercises, in addition to giving you many different educational pieces. These are the same education pieces that we give our patients and clients in the clinic. So check that out if you're looking to learn more about bulletproofing your hip for life. Also, if you learned anything from this podcast and you enjoyed this conversation that we had, please rate, review, and subscribe. Let us know if there's any other topics that you want us to cover. And thanks for tuning in as always.